welcome to our 4th annual CATtalks event. On behalf of the Alumni Board and the CATtalks Committee, thank you for being here, especially in this lousy weather. We appreciate it. I'm Anna Driver-Wick, class of 1995, and chair of this year's CATtalks. CATtalks is an evolution of our former back-to-school night event, and it's a chance for the Westminster community, both near and far, since we record these and post them later, to hear from some of our esteemed alumni on various topics. And this year, it is our honor to have Nigel Walker from the class of 2013 and Brooke Baldwin, class of 1997, here to talk to us. We're going to begin this evening hearing from Nigel. After Westminster, Nigel attended Vanderbilt University, where he graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Engineering Science and minors in Engineering Management and Managerial Studies, with a focus in financial economics. Upon graduation, Nigel received the Michael B. Keegan Traveling Fellowship. His project was titled Spending Time with Your Father: Global Perspectives on Fatherhood. He traveled to all 7 continents and over 20 countries, interviewing people about the roles their father played in their lives growing up in their respective countries. Nigel is currently teaching with Teach for America here at Banneker High School. Welcome, Nigel.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, and thank you all for joining me. On your way in, I believe most of you are able to receive either a note card or an envelope and a letter. Raise your hand if you did get one. Okay, awesome. I want you to take that envelope or that note card and write these 3 questions on them. Question number 1. Who is your father? Two, how did you spend time with your father? And 3, what advice do you have for me, a potential future father? Who was your father, or who is your father? How did you spend time with him? Or how do you spend time with him? And what advice do you have for me, a potential future father? From May 2017 to May 2018, I spent the year traveling to 22 different countries, studying the impact of fatherhood. Now, I could tell you a few things about what makes a good dad, but I haven't changed the diapers. I haven't fussed about getting your homework done. I definitely haven't been waiting up all night with someone missing from curfew and haven't heard a call from them with that type of stress. So what I hope to hear tonight is a few notes from yourselves about what makes a good dad as you answer these 3 questions during this presentation. So whatever comes to mind about who your dad is, where he's from, what he did for a living, any characteristics, how you spent time with him or without him, if you grew up without him like I did, and what advice you have for me. Because what I hope to hear is that even though I traveled to all these different places, spoke to hundreds of people, I realized I still have so much to learn from each individual person that I meet about what makes a good dad. So I graduated here from Westminster in 2013, but I actually started my career at Westminster in 2006 when I was, I think, 10 or 11. It was about a few months after my dad died of heart complications. So from then on, I really wasn't able to have a relationship with him. And even before then, he left before I was born. So when I came to Vanderbilt and I found out there was a traveling fellowship that would let you study something that you always were interested in, but you never really could take a look at while you were in school, I decided to study fatherhood. So I could learn how to be the perfect dad, and I could get everything right, and I could make all the decisions that would say, Nigel, you were the best dad ever. I couldn't trade you in for anything. And it worked, no. But I did learn a few things. I did learn that coming into the trip, I had an idea of the dad who shows up for every football game and is at dinner every night and loves their partner and answers all the questions correctly and never loses his temper. What I didn't realize is that as I told my story over and over, I had been so petrified of being a good dad and so petrified of sharing how insecure I felt about being a man and not having grown up with my dad. Insecure about how I definitely still struggle with expressing my emotions because the representations I had in movies and with coaches and with teachers and with Boy Scout masters was that emotions are, you gotta keep them down here. And so when I went to Cuba and Jamaica and the Dominican Republic and Spain and Italy and Denmark and Sweden, Uganda, South Africa, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Israel, Thailand, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Antarctica, Brazil, China, India, Chile, and Argentina, I told my story over and over and carried tissues and cried my heart out. And by the time I got to Antarctica over New Year's Eve, I was looking out the window of this flight after being 5 hours, and I see these snow-covered mountains. And it's already New Year's Eve, so you're in a super reflective space, thinking about how many people I'd met and the stories I've heard. And what I learned about my dad was, it must have been incredibly difficult to have a son and not be able to be there for all these spectacular moments that being a dad entails. And so for the first time in my life, rather than looking at the child who never really saw dad pick me up from sports, to being the man who could look at what it's like being a dad and be in this space where I'm flying over this place where I've never seen before. It's bright outside, like it's noonday, but it's midnight. And say it must have been incredibly difficult and painful. And now that I understand a little bit of how it must have not have been easy for you either, Dad, even though you're not here, I can forgive you. I can forgive you. Coming into it, I wanted to be a good dad. That's all I cared about. But I never really saw that I could look at myself and see that I was still holding on to something after so many years, thinking I had become a grown man, but I still had some stuff to deal with, which is forgiving my dad for leaving me, leaving my mom, and deciding that they were better off, no matter what happened, without me. Now fast forward to when I get to India. And I've been in a couple dozen places by now, and I'm thinking bigger things than just fatherhood and what I can learn from different people and different foods I can try. I'm starting to think about how I'm viewing the world, and I've never been out of the country, and I'm completely alone. I mean, think about all the times that you've been truly alone in an entire city, and nobody speaks the same language as you. And I'm trying to catch a bus from Rishikesh to Jaipur, which is about, I think, a 12-hour bus ride. But it was only like $7, so of course I bought the ticket. And I'm actually in this coat and this shirt because I brought one suit for any type of office settings that I needed. I would just wear it because it wouldn't fit in my suit. And it wouldn't fit in my pack, and I thought it would get wrinkled. But I get dropped off at the bus stop by this tuk-tuk, which is basically a 3-wheeled taxi with no doors, and they do not care about traffic rules. I mean, they're like on the right side of the road, I'm on the left side. I'm like, which side do y'all drive on? And it's about 9 o'clock at night, and I get dropped off with all of my stuff, and I realize that the bus isn't showing up. And I'm thinking, I'm totally alone. This is not a game. I decided to just start to wave down. People are driving by, and finally, after about 10 minutes, the car stops. And I've never been hitchhiking before. I definitely would not hitchhike in Atlanta. I don't know why I decided to hitchhike. When the car stops, I'm feeling confident in the 5 Hindi classes I've gone to for about $5 an hour. And I am able to ask him, where is the bus? And I get a yes from him. I was like, that's not the answer to the question that I needed. I get a yes from him. And so I get into the back of the seat, put my bag down. The driver is talking to, I think, his nephew, and they start driving down the road. And I noticed they start stopping, talking to people, and the people that they talk to go like this. And what does that look like? That looks like I'm giving you directions because you don't know where you're going. So I don't know where I'm going, the driver doesn't know where he's going, but we're in this together because they were nice enough to trust me to get in their car, and I trust them enough to get inside their car. And I say all that because a lot of what I think I'm going to have to teach my kids and understand with my partner is how to trust people and be brave enough to realize that no matter what you do, you're going to be in a circumstance where you cannot control the impact. And I think a lot of my 22 years up to that point was trying to control everything around me by going to Westminster and getting these good grades. But what I'm going to realize as a father is I'm incredibly vulnerable to the circumstances my kids are going to be under. And it was about It was about 5 countries into my trip where I talked to somebody who had actually reconciled things with their dad. They grew up without him. They were trying to understand how to be a good dad, and they realized they needed to go talk to their dad, and that was impossible for me. So what we had a conversation about was how I can have that conversation with my father without him even being there. I learned that the best way to do that was to go see his family. So I added a final destination before I got back to the US, or I guess got back to Atlanta, which was in New York, where my dad lived and grew up. And I went to see his family. I had been to well over a couple dozen countries because I was passing through places, but not necessarily counting them and doing interviews in them. But the scariest thing I've ever experienced was landing in New York City, catching the train to Queens, getting off of the last stop and getting picked up by one of my cousins who hadn't seen me since I was a baby. And he's just over the moon. He can't believe, like, out of nowhere, Nigel has called him. He has been able to travel the world, go to this spectacular university, and out of all the people that, honestly, a lot of us know and love who grew up with not so great relationships with their dad, they have this singular, amazing opportunity to take a look at fatherhood, and now they're back to tell the stories. And what I'm really back to do is to reconcile all those phone calls I didn't pick up that were from my dad's family who tried to reach out, and to reconcile the fact that they really wanted to get to know me, but I was that little kid who thought that this is this distant family, I don't want to be forced to talk to you, I don't want to go visit you, and I want to ask for forgiveness for what I didn't even understand I was doing and the pain I was causing as a young man. And when we're driving, we're just making small talk, not about any of the kind of life-changing circumstances that we're under right now. And I finally get to our house, or my cousin's house, and my grandmother's on the other side of the door, my dad's mom, and this is another person I haven't seen since I was a baby. But for the grandparents in the room, you can only imagine how fantastic it is to see one of your grandkids again after 20-something years. So when I open the door, her jaw drops, because if you saw a picture of my dad, this is what he looks like. I'll tell you, well, he's a little bit more muscular than he was. But her jaw drops, and we hug for about 3 minutes. Hugs last about 4 seconds, and we just stood there and are just emptying ourselves of what's been bottled up tight that I didn't even know was there. And so coming into this trip where I'm realizing it's much more than just being a dad who shows up. It's a dad who listens, shows up, shares, empathizes, understands how the people are feeling in the family, to realizing that I can really forgive my dad, and then standing there hugging my grandmother, I realized for the first time in my life that I really love this man. And I forgive him. I never thought I'd be to the point where I feel like very intimately connected to this man that I don't even remember. And the opportunity to kind of stumble into that is, again, something I could I could never pay for. And when I'm thinking about what my relationship with my family is going to look like, I'm so excited, I'm still so nervous, but at the end of the day, I think it's going to be okay because I can start that right now. I can start listening to the people I meet right now. I can start showing up for the people that I meet right now. I can start sharing how I'm feeling. I can start sharing what I'm stressed out about. I can start sharing about what I'm scared of. I don't have to be this archetype of a man who I saw in the movies who makes the crowd erupt just by staring dramatically into the camera. I can be authentically a human being with the people that I meet right now, trusting them to be in that space with me. And so what I hope you do with these last few moments is kind of finish up the letter that you were writing to just explain a little bit about how your reflections on your dad has impacted you. And if you're interested, you can write a return address on there. So when I collect them, I get the chance to write you back. Thank you.
Wait up here if, oh, there we go. I was told to wait up here if anybody would like to ask any questions. Yes. My mom is super embarrassed. She's one of two people. My mom and my grandmother are one of two people, or the two people who really didn't want me to go on the trip. They were thinking, are you crazy? We don't know anybody outside the country. You go spreading our family drama to everyone. But they are super proud of the fears that I have faced and super proud of the impact that the stories that have been collected has made on the people who have messaged me, who read on the website that I had, or people who I've talked to who have been able to kind of pour out the impact that their dad has had on them. Because nobody really asks you, like, what was your dad like and the type of impact he has had on you. So they're definitely hesitant and embarrassed, but also super proud of what has been made of it. And also the fact that I've turned around and been able to use what I learned about being a dad to go into the classroom and create relationships with my students. Yes, Ms. Bean.
Nigel, how much of that vulnerability have you shared with the students at Banneker, and have you seen that they have opened up to you because of that?
Oh, I shared in the beginning when I first got to the classroom in August. Like I traveled and I grew up without my dad, but in about 30 seconds they were just mad that they had to learn Algebra 1 from me. But what I realized sitting down with my department head, who's been teaching for 30 years, this is her 30th year, was that even if she came into my classroom right now, they wouldn't want to learn from Miss Moreland. They'd be like, where's my teacher? Where's Mr. Walker? And like, this is the same child who's bickering with me about why they don't feel like turning in their homework or why they don't feel like picking up their pencil. But that type of vulnerability that comes from having an argument with somebody who you're there for just so that they can learn, and then showing up the next day completely forgiving what happened and holding them accountable for being better than they expected of themselves. And so that's where like the consistent showing up creates that type of vulnerability where they're trusting me enough to learn from me and being loyal enough to say, like, I'm ready to learn from Mr. Walker. I don't know who you are, lady, you know. Yes.
How did you decide who you were going to interview? Was it random, or did you plan it, or did you?
Yes. So that was a process I kind of did on the fly. I mean, before I left, I knew where I was going, how much I was going to spend in that country, and when I was going to leave. But when I got there, I knew about maybe one person. I mean, I got to a few countries where I didn't know anyone. And once I knew a person, I would ask them to introduce me to people, and we would go to like a McDonald's or a bookstore or a restaurant, and I would introduce my story in about 30 seconds. And in 5 minutes, I had to get to a vulnerable enough place to where, like, you just met me, but can you tell me about your father and how you feel about him, you know? And then actually it happened where the family I was introduced to through a college friend in South Africa, they introduced me to a host family in Thailand, and that host family introduced me to a host family in Australia, so it kind of snowballed, which is pretty spectacular to the generosity of human beings, you know? Yes.
Did you have any mentors throughout your time, either here at Vanderbilt,
Hmm.
allowed you to start maybe opening up about thinking about father? I mean, did you have any important men in your life that
Mhm.
now with your students you kind of are trying to emulate the role they played for you? Or did you feel like you were kind of putting a wall up towards that?
Oh, absolutely. Mr. Quillian is the father of one of my classmates who graduated with me from Westminster, and he was also a scoutmaster in my Boy Scout troop. He wrote my recommendation letter for Teach for America and for the Keegan Traveling Fellowship, and he was also the first person I talked to when I said, I want to go into my interview for the Traveling Fellowship already having established a relationship where I can go somewhere. We're talking about 9 o'clock at night, the night before the interview, and he picks up the phone like right then and there, said, I'll call you right back, and then puts us on three-way to talk to Fontaine Kohler, who takes Boy Scouts here in Atlanta to Uganda every year. So the first place I had booked was Uganda because Mr. Quillian was a consistent enough and reliable enough mentor from when I was in the 7th grade here at Westminster, which is just like a little microcosm of the type of family atmosphere we have here. Yeah. Yes, please.
What was your most, do you have like a particular interview where
Mhm.
you know, were just shocked by what someone said, or where just anything that just really stood out of a shocking story,
Mhm.
or I don't know, something
Yeah,
that
yeah.
really hit you?
Yeah. Well, there were three that really hit me for a variety of reasons. One was pretty horrific, that talked about like a father who had murdered the mom and how they had really processed that to just kind of keep living with their lives, which showed me that a lot of people don't really have that kind of Brady Bunch growing up, whether it's mom and dad and everything works out really well. It can actually get pretty deep into like a horrifying situation, and to see like the power it takes to reflect on that experience and not really have that continue to carry on with you in a way that is affecting every single relationship that you have. The second one that comes to mind was one that kind of sent me into like child mode, if that makes sense, where it reminded me so much. I was talking to this dad who was reminding me so much of my dad that I was very angry with him. He was a young man who grew up in a, what are they called? They're like, not favelas, but they're these like makeshift towns in South Africa yes, a township. That's exactly what they're called. And he was a sailor who had gotten a scholarship, or who had gotten in this organization that would sponsor his sailing, and he had been this Olympian. He's a year older than me, and he's explaining to me what it's like being a dad and how difficult it is kind of going to see his son, and that his son like lives in a different town than he does. And I became angry because he said he used to pick up the phone to call his son, and his son never really wanted to speak with him. And I said, well, that makes perfect sense to me, because you're a complete stranger to this little boy, and the mom who's taking care of him and raising him has no effect on your actions, on how that's affecting the little boy. And it just allowed me to register what I was experiencing when I never wanted to pick up the phone for my dad when I was little, or pick up the phone for any of my family members when I was little. And a lot of the attitude that my mom had on my dad, where he wanted to name me one thing and she wanted to name me the other, and she was like, no, this is what we're doing. You live your life because we're taken care of over here. And that third interview was the one of this housekeeper who worked in one of the host families that I had. He was a very, very just like humble man who had a young daughter about 8 years old. His daughter, and his wife like lived in this pretty conservatively sized house in the back. And this guy was just overjoyed, telling me about just like stories of his daughter and how good she is in school, and how he met his wife, and how just like how content he was, which is literally his whole thing was being a dad. He didn't have like anything luxurious about his life except for how wealthy he was in his relationships with his wife and his daughter, which is kind of the goal, you know. One more question? Yes.
I have two.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Mhm.
The first one is, throughout that year, coming home, and as a future father yourself, is there something that you're kind of holding on to when you're blessed with that chance of being a dad, that you really feel like you can hang your hat on? And then the second part is, I mean, what a rich experience that you just undertook. What's the next chapter look like for you as it relates to this fatherhood topic?
So am I going to have kids anytime soon?
Keep that to
Not quite. The thing that I take, or if I understand your question correctly, it's like the thing that I take with me that I'm most excited about when it comes to that chapter. I think I'm most excited, to be honest, I'm most excited for my wife, but after that, I'm most excited for the moment where I realize that, like, in some way, it's like a combination of some way my kids or my child is like their own person and kind of can set sail and really no longer needs me. Like, ideally, like, there's nothing that, like, dad is so mountainous that they, like, always need me in their life for. And then kind of seeing my kids, like, reconcile whatever mistakes or shortcomings that I have, that they've, like, grown to reflect on them and accept that they are different from their dad, and they don't have to let that, like, hold them back. Hence, like, why I called this, like, dads are different, because they're not you. And then the second question is kind of like, what do I kind of see next coming from this? I do see, particularly for kind of outside, like, of my own family, I see kind of writing down the stories that I've had so far with a very good friend of mine, so that we can compile a book where it kind of makes sense of the narrative that happened not only throughout the year of traveling to all these 22 countries, but also the moments where I thought back to my own childhood and what I was able to reconcile and reflect on and come out of it with, if that makes sense. Does that answer your questions? Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you again for your attention.